For thousands of years, one thing has never changed about ground combat. Someone has to actually take that ground. A human being has to move across open terrain, close with the enemy, and take and hold that position. Well, that changed this past week when Ukrainian ground robots moved on a Russian-held position. There was no infantry behind them, no soldiers in the fight at all. And when those Russian defenders actually looked up what they saw coming, they dropped their weapons and they surrendered. And it wasn't to soldiers, they surrendered to machines. The problem Ukraine has faced over the last 4 years is the same problem every modern army has faced on a contested front line. Terrain has to be taken by someone and it has to be held. And that is usually requires someone to bleed for it. Russian defensive positions are layered with minefields, first-person or FPV drones, artillery, thermal optics covering every avenue of approach. Sending infantry into this is not an easy thing to do. Human lives are at stake and often pay the price for this. Ukraine's answer was to take the human out of this equation. They didn't do it theoretically. They didn't do it in a lab. They actually did it on the front lines in Donetsk. The systems that President Zelensky said that were used were the Ratel, the Termit, and the Vola. Ukrainian-built unmanned ground vehicles, UGVs. Robots designed to operate where soldiers cannot. Now, we've seen this, and we've done some videos recently with the Chinese People's Liberation Army using robot dogs with guns mounted to them, infiltrating buildings, etc. But this appears to be the first real utilization of this. So these UGVs, these unmanned ground vehicles, they carry out direct assaults, logistics, medevac, mine laying, and kamikaze strikes. The full spectrum of ground combat tasks. So in 3 months, those systems completed more than 22,000 frontline missions. So they're really ramping up here. So let that number sink in, 22,000. That growth rate is definitely not gradual. In November of 2025, unmanned ground vehicles completed roughly 2,900 missions. So by March of 2026, that number crossed 9,000. In a single month, active units grew from 67 to 167 in that same window. That's a 2.5 increase in deployed systems in roughly 4 months. Russia took note. They are now actively targeting those routes these robots use. Mines on the robot paths, first-person view drones, FPV drones, hunting these machines directly. When your enemy starts devoting resources to killing your robots instead of your soldiers, it feels like the concept is probably working. So what does an unmanned ground vehicle only assault actually look like from a tactical standpoint? Now, the details of this will probably continue to percolate, as I'm sure we don't have the entire picture as it's relatively fresh. But the position stated by Ukraine was that no infantry was involved, absolutely zero. They used ground robots, moved in, supported by drones overhead. They allowed these robots to advance. The Russian soldiers in those positions reportedly dropped their gear and surrendered, and they surrendered to these robots. That definitely tells you something about the psychological dimension of this. And it probably comes from years of these videos where we see soldiers who are run down by FPV drones with no exit option, they're out of gas, and they know their fate is sealed. That definitely is weaving into the mindset of this conflict and probably every conflict from here on out. You have removed one key component of the battlefield, a human being fighting another human being. A robot does not negotiate. It doesn't stop because of incoming fire or it's scared. It does not feel that fear. And Russian soldiers in that trench knew there were no Ukrainian soldiers behind that machine who could be killed in order to stop the advance, to scare them away. The surrender was the rational game plan. Their position was indefensible. Now, the Ukrainian Defense Ministry has not released those details, which again is not surprising. But obviously, it appears to be very capable given what they have done in just a short time span. What it does appear that these are either wheeled or tracked vehicles designed to operate obviously in hazardous frontline environments. They can support a variety of mission sets when it comes to it, including being kamikaze type systems, being able to detonate on target. They also can evacuate casualties and they can lay mines. The numbers are clearly showcasing the operational scalability of this. A Ukrainian commander reported in February that ground robots was already handling 75% of the logistic missions around their area of operations. 3/4 of the supply runs in one of the most contested urban corridors on the front, handled by robots. That is not experimental. That is definitely operational and executable. One of President Zelensky's top advisors actually said that nearly 30% of Ukraine's infantry could be immediately replaced by these ground robots. Now, that does seem like a pretty big stretch, but we're starting to see the real implications and tactical execution of this. He went on to further state that the ultimate goal is to replace 80%. So now, what is that battlefield going to look like? I think we probably can debate the timeline and maybe the full scalability of this, but clearly the trajectory is trending in a more robotic Terminator style feel. Now, this was not the first surrender of Russian troops to a robot. Another scenario actually occurred in January where 3 Russian soldiers were taken as prisoners of war. They laid down their arms when they were surrounded by a robot. Again, captured by a machine with no human in the loop directly on site. I'm not the only one saying this or taking note, but clearly the conflict in Ukraine is a wake-up call. It is a signaling of how the battlefield is rapidly changing and how warfighters must think about how combat operations are conducted. So the actual walkthrough of this operation, again, a lot of the details are murky and still emerging because President Zelensky, he went out and told us about this, but he did not say about the location of where this occurred. But we can envision that this operation was clearly planned out and pre-positioned these robots to go out there and conduct this operation. With drone systems overhead supporting these ground robots, these robots pushed towards the Russian position, which ultimately faced a pretty big decision and something I imagine they didn't train for nor expect. There was no Ukrainian soldier to shoot, to scare away. They were facing an adversary that does not reason, does not think, it just does. I'm sure they attempted to suppress or dispel this attack of some way, some kind, but realized that their fate was sealed and ultimately surrendered. Every military in the world is watching Ukraine right now, or at least they should be. It seems like there's a lot of lessons that can be learned from it. The U.S. Army has been funding autonomous ground system programs for years. What Ukraine is demonstrating is that that technology does not need to be perfect, and it needs to be available en masse. The shift from logistics to direct combat is a critical threshold. We just don't have ground robots that are resupplying ammunition. We have them with an offensive capability, and that is an entirely different capability and skill set. Undoubtedly, Russia will adapt. Other forces will adapt to these robots. Targeting the robot routes first with mines and other first-person view drones means that they definitely understand and respect the threat. Adaptation definitely takes time. It definitely takes resources. Ukraine won this one with the production rate, the acceleration rate, the adaptability rate. But we can only expect that Russia will come up with new countermeasures and they'll work quickly to try and field these. But again, this is something that we all should be watching. So what changes now? We now have seen a position that has been taken without infantry. Maybe this is a before and after moment, a line in the sand, if you will, when it comes to ground warfare doctrine. Every generation of warfare has a moment where the old assumptions stop being true. Tanks make cavalry obsolete. Precision munitions change what a single aircraft can do. This might be a moment for ground combat. Drones have obviously injected a whole new element and dynamic into ground warfare, but now we have a position that was taken by robots. No soldiers that were utilized to cross a line. I definitely think this is an interesting moment, to say the least. If you like this type of content, make sure you check out our free newsletter down below. I'd be curious to get your thoughts on this, and I'll see you next time. Next, picture 16, 15,000,